Welcome to the Archaeology Studio. Today's episode offers a guide through King's College Chapel at Cambridge, built during the 1400s through 1500s and still in use today. By the end of this episode, you will be prepared to describe the major historical elements of the chapel, discuss their contexts, and consider the larger historical implications. The chapel was designed as one major part of King's College at Cambridge, and the college has been among the defining characteristics of Cambridge overall. The design and construction occurred primarily during the 1400s through 1500s, followed by numerous episodes of repair and renovation. Like many of the historical elements at Cambridge, King's College, and particularly the chapel, continue to be used now. Outside official business of the college, tourists and visitors are allowed into the chapel and limited surrounding areas in controlled conditions. King's College Chapel can be appreciated today for its historical architecture, a number of engineering achievements, association with a series of historical events and periods, and the ability to sustain through centuries of different social, political, religious, and other contexts. The history of the chapel's construction extended over several decades, transitions between different kings of England, and a veritable revolution against the religion that started this chapel in the first place. The foundational context of the chapel can be traced back to 1441, when King Henry VI ordered the start of work for King's College at Cambridge, intended as a companion for Eton College. A few years later, in 1444, King Henry VI formalized the intention to build the chapel as a primary feature of the college. The location was selected between the River Cam and High Street. The chapel was oriented along cardinal directions of north, south, east, and west. The formal entrance was from the west side, leading into the nave or antechapel for accommodating most of the congregation during the religious ceremonies. The altar was at the east side of the building, where the priests, attendants, and the choir would perform the religious rites. Several side chambers or private chapels were distributed along the north and south borders. The administrative duties of the college, including the chapel construction and operations, were assigned to the college provost. In addition to the provost, the key personnel at the college were the students, initially planned as 12 impoverished students, symbolic of the 12 apostles of Jesus in Christianity. This plan then expanded at a grander scale to include 70 students, symbolic of the 70 evangelists chosen by Jesus. In 1446, the actual construction started for the chapel. King Henry VI was credited as laying down the first stone with his own hands. Meanwhile, King's College officially was launched with its royal charter. In 1448, King Henry VI decreed that £1,000 would be provided each year for the construction of King's College Chapel. The proclamation sometimes is called his will. Notably, this document was written in English of the middle 1400s, rather than in Latin that usually was the language of official decrees. This document, among many others, reveals the strong role of the Roman Catholic Church in connection with the royal throne at that time. During the years 1455 through 1487, construction was slow at the chapel and at many other royal projects due to the series of wars known collectively as the War of the Roses. Different rivals to the throne of England campaigned in war against each other. Under those circumstances, King Henry VI could not provide a steady flow of funding for the chapel. He was imprisoned in 1461, and he was murdered inside the Tower of London 10 years later, in 1471. Replacing Henry VI, the new King Edward IV supported little work at the chapel, and later King Richard III instructed for renewed efforts. In the year 1485, King Henry VII defeated Richard III and reclaimed the throne for the House of Tudor. Eventually, King Henry VII agreed to continue the work of the King's College and particularly of the chapel. In 1506, King Henry VII visited at the chapel in person. A few years later, in 1509, he provided £5,000 for the continued construction. An iron-bound chest reportedly held the £5,000 from King Henry VII. Later, in 1509, King Henry VIII assumed the throne, and the next decades would cement his position as one of the most infamous kings in history. At King's College Chapel, King Henry VIII was motivated to complete the construction as a monument of his own royal eminence in connection with the Christian God and Church. Among the major tasks was the construction of an impressive roof covering, in this case achieving the world's largest fan vault. During the years 1512 through 1515, this construction proceeded under the guidance of master stonemason John Wastel. In fact, even today, this construction retains its title as the world's largest fan vault. With the fan vault securely in place, the great windows were created and installed during the years 1515 through 1531. They included several components of stained glass, displaying various scenes of Christian religion and iconography. Several glass artists were commissioned for completing all of the panels. The construction of the chapel was considered complete in 1531, but a number of additions and renovations would proceed thereafter. This time marked a major turning point in the history of England and of Europe when King Henry VIII began his departure from the Roman Catholic Church. Henry VIII sought an annulment of his marriage to Catherine of Aragon in order to be free to marry someone else who might produce his desired male heir to the throne. The Roman Catholic Church disapproved, and Henry VIII indulged in creating a separate Church of England that would conform to his wishes. In 1532, Henry VIII secretly married his second wife, Anne Boleyn, and soon he was excommunicated from the Catholic Church. His new Church of England eventually would bring a much larger effort of the Protestant Reformation of Christianity, involving more than just the issue of annulment or divorce. Later, Henry VIII ordered the execution of his second wife, Anne Boleyn, and eventually he would be married 6 times. During the years 1538 through 1542, Henry VIII ordered the destruction of numerous Catholic shrines, monasteries, and monuments. Nevertheless, King's College Chapel at Cambridge would be allowed to continue. In the year 1532, reportedly in celebration of his marriage to Anne Boleyn, Henry VIII started the construction of a new feature inside King's College Chapel. This new feature is known as the rood screen, or sometimes the choir screen. situated between the nave and the choir portions of the chapel. This project was completed in 1536, coincidentally during the same year when Henry VIII ordered the execution of Anne Boleyn. The rood screen supports the chapel's musical pipe organ that has been repaired, replaced, and renovated many times since the 1500s. The rood screen was made of wood, and it displayed many carved motifs that reinforced religious piety and the royal status of King Henry VIII. The French words Dieu et mon droit translate into English as God and my right. The Latin words sola salus servire Deo translate into English as our sole salvation is in serving God. The carving of Henricus VIII replicates the lettering on royal coins of King Henry VIII. The simple letters HR refer to Henry Rex as the Latin version of King Henry. Many royal documents of the time were signed with these two letters instead of the full signature of the king. By the time when the chapel was completed in the 1500s, already it incorporated elements from significantly different eras and contexts. The major construction occurred primarily from 1446 through 1531, but the full history of the chapel involved much more than this bracketing of years. Even after centuries of repairs and renovations, King's College Chapel retains its historical elements of design, artwork, and surrounding setting at Cambridge. The formal entrance doors of the chapel face to the west, toward the River Cam. Approaching from that side, the chapel's vertical dimension is most striking. In a fuller view around the chapel, the design is considered among the finest examples of the perpendicular Gothic style of architecture that stressed vertical lines. The formal entrance was decorated with carved stonework. Over and around the doorway, on both the exterior and interior sides, the decorative pieces show the crest and symbols of the House of Tudor that would have been consistent for King Henry VI, Henry VII, and Henry VIII. The formal entrance brought people into the nave or antechapel area. From here, the altar of the chapel could be visible at the far east end. The area closer to the altar generally was reserved for the priests, attendants, and the choir closest to the religious proceedings. The rood screen or choir screen of King Henry VIII divided the space between the nave and the choir. At the altar, a priest would perform the religious rites, typically aided by other priests and assistants. Traditionally, a choir would have been in attendance for musical performance, presumably along with the chapel's pipe organ. Along the north and south sides of the building, several separate chambers functioned as individual chapels. They were used for private prayers, meditation, and other purposes. King's College Chapel continues in use today. Generally speaking, the larger King's College operates off-limits to the public. Visitors and tourists are allowed to walk into certain areas, including the chapel, by permission, and of course, following all applicable regulations. The chapel has survived as an example of multiple historical events and contexts incorporated into a complex construction. The different elements of the chapel reflect how the construction work and artistic expression changed and adapted through the dynamic history of England. Those events shaped the history of the chapel, of the larger King's College, and of Cambridge overall, in parallel with the changing history of England and of Europe during the 1400s through 1500s. In concluding this episode, now you should be familiar with how to describe the historical elements of King's College Chapel at Cambridge, and you can discuss the larger historical contexts and implications. I hope that you enjoyed this episode and that you will explore more with the Archaeology Studio.